All right, everyone, it's 1 o'clock and I'm kicking off the stream. Please remember this community meeting is public, so everything that you say will be streamed and recorded live on YouTube. So please be cognizant of what you're saying. Today, we're going to have a demo of GetCube, some release updates, graph of the week, some SIG updates from cluster lifecycle, auto scaling, and SIG PM, and then announcements. It is 1 week till KubeCon, so let's get to work. Shahid, do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks, George. Hi, everyone. I'm Shahid. I'm joining along with my colleague Thirumarai. We are from Hasura. We are working on a platform on Kubernetes for application developers. So GitCube came out of our work at Hasura. So we are slowly open sourcing more and more parts of Hasura. So I'll jump right into the demo plus explain. I'll jump right into the demo. So I'm going to share my screen. I hope it's visible. Okay. So GitCube is a tool which will let you build and deploy Docker images onto a Kubernetes cluster using just git push. The only dependency on the client side is Git, and everything else is done on the cluster itself. So I'll start with the demo so that I'll explain the architecture alongside the demo. So there we have a repo called GitCube example, and in that we have a couple of steps listed out to go through a complete workflow. So the first step is to create certain Kubernetes resources on any Kubernetes cluster. So we are using a custom resource definition. We're calling it remotes, and it's namespaced, so you can have RBAC-based authorizations for all of these objects. And there is another deployment called GetCube D. This is a Docker in Docker image which builds the Docker images. There is another deployment, which is the GetCube controller. This is the controller for the CRD, which operator for the CRD, which watches the objects and act accordingly. So I already have a Kubernetes cluster created on GKE here. I have set up my kubectl to connect to this cluster. It's a single node cluster as of now. I have not deployed anything on this. So the first step is to create this GitCube CRD controller and other objects. It's just a kubectl create command. So I will create these resources. We can see that a couple of resources are getting created. The CRD, service account, cluster role binding, 2 deployments, and the config map. The config map stores certain configuration required by the GetCube D deployment. The next step is to expose this GetCube D deployment. This is so that you get a remote on the cluster with which you can push git push to the cluster. So we have a example repo which is just an Nginx deployment. So the first step is to create the Nginx deployment and service objects. So I'm going to create it now. So parallelly, what I'm going to do is to run a kubectl proxy, so that I have to provision one more load balancer and all. And I'm going to look at what's deployed right now. Oops. Okay. So this is just a plain Nginx image on a Kubernetes cluster. So the next step is to create the remote CRD so that we can start git pushing to the to update this deployment. So for that, the authentication is based on public keys. So I'm going to add my public key to the CRD definition. So the CRD is called remote.yaml. If you look at this, it says the deployment to update is called Nginx. The container is called Nginx. The path is the current directory, the path at which Docker build has to happen, and this is the Docker file to use. And this is my SSH public key, which is used to authorize me. So I will create this. So I've added my SSH public key already. I will create the remote object now. So the remote object is created. Now I will look at the status for this remote object. So get remote. This is going to give me a remote URL. This is a get remote URL. So I'm going to set this get remote -v. Okay, I already have an example remote. Set URL example. So I'm going to so I've set this remote as the name example, and what I'm going to do now is to git push example master. So what we have right now is just an Nginx plain basic image. So I'm going to push this code, which is nothing but some HTML. So as we can see, the git push is triggering a pre-receive hook, which is building out the Docker image inside the cluster. It is as well as updating the Kubernetes deployment using kubectl kubecontrol set image. It is also showing us the rollout status. So it says build has been completed. So when I go and refresh now, I have the new files up and running on the cluster. So any change I make, I can look at the HTML. Any change I make here will be, and whenever I commit and push this, it will be live on the cluster again. So I'm gonna make this edit. I'm gonna commit everything. So I'm gonna push again. So every time I push, a new Docker image is built and rolled out. The image is tagged with the commit hash, and I can see the changes are live again. So hello Kubernetes community is live. So that's what GetCube does. We are working on more features like customizable hooks, all sorts of Git hooks, and or other sub hooks like web hooks which can be triggered from GitHub, etc. So going through the architecture, this is what it looks like. There is a remote CRD, which is managed by this controller. There is a GetCube deployment, which builds out the Docker images and updates the deployment. The Git pushes happen to this deployment. This is the Git remote listening on port 22. And every time a user Git pushes, GetCube builds a Docker image and updates the deployment. So that's what GetCube does, a small tool which helps developers get started with Kubernetes quickly. The only dependency, as I mentioned earlier, is Git, and everything else is as easy as doing a Git push. That's it. That's my demo. I am 1 minute early.
Yeah, you have 2 minutes for questions. If anybody wants to ask questions, either here or type them in the chat, and I'll read them out for you.
Sure. I'll stop my screen share. So yeah, any questions? Okay. So
Shahid, do you want to tell them about our talk at KubeCon?
Yeah, so we'll be at KubeCon. Do feel free to catch us during KubeCon. We are also speaking about Git push workflows on Kubernetes, generally about GitOps and how we are using GitOps at Hasura to make application development with Kubernetes easier. So yeah, feel free to catch us at KubeCon. Tirumare and I will be there along with Tanmay. And awesome.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that demo. And you can find the link to the URL in the show notes. Moving on to release updates with Josh Burkus.
Hey there. 1.11 release. Features are now frozen, as in we have our complete list of features. If you actually look at the link there, you will find sorry, I can't actually share my screen via Zoom on this computer. But I supplied links there, so you can see we've got a list of 44 filed features in the features repo. If your SIG is working on a feature that you expect to complete for 1.11 and you haven't filed it, now is the time to private message Ihor and apologize and beg his forgiveness. So, but otherwise that looks pretty good. That's more features than we had at feature freeze time for 1.10, which is expected since we're not on the first quarter of the year anymore. And hopefully that will lead to a nice, rich 1.11 with lots of new stuff. Unfortunately, our CI signal is not looking so good. If you actually click through to test status, right now, about 1/5 of the jobs for general testing, the ones that we consider master blocking, are failing. More seriously, pretty much all upgrade tests are failing. There's actually one job that's passing, but everything else is failing. And that's actually kind of important because our next deadline is to do our first beta release on May 15th. And if we don't have a lot of improvement in passing tests, etc., before then, the beta will not be going out on time. CI signal, and by the way, big thanks to Aish for organizing all of this, all of those reports and everything where you can see everything that's blocking and failing and being worked on. That's all her, as far as I know. The issues have been filed against all of the test failures. Some SIGs are being much more responsive than others in terms of working on those. I need to remind everybody in this call that if your SIG is responsible for a test, you're responsible for debugging why that test is not passing. So please respond to those issues. I would really like to see, we've got two things running this. First of all is getting the beta out on time because we have a stable master, and the second part is actually being able to shorten code freeze, because if all the tests are passing, we can have a very short code freeze. And more time for us to work on development of features, which would be really nice. So please go ahead and look at those tests and debug those issues. Since we, for those of us going to KubeCon, we effectively only have 2 work weeks before beta and before we end up off schedule. So thanks. That's it for 1.11.
Okay. I just wanted to give a quick update on 1.10. So the branch is now frozen, and depending on the last runs, because I had to revert a pull request today morning. So depending on the test signal, I'm planning to cut 1.10.2 tomorrow or on Monday. That's it, basically.
Josh, can you mute, please?
60 people for this open source Google project. You'd get a kick out. Look at these guys.
All right. Anything else for 110? Did you drop out or? Okay, let's move on to Graph of the Week, Slack stats with Paris.
Hi, everybody. Okay, George, can you hear me?
Sound great.
Okay, cool. All right, we're going to share my screen here. And so on a quarterly basis, Contributor Experience is going to start releasing some stats. George last week, for instance, did YouTube. This week we'll do Slack. So you can see what a Goliath our Slack instance is. Right now we have 35,000 users of Slack with 168 public channels, and our weekly active users keep creeping as well. We're over 5,000. And just to give you some comparison, at the bottom of the active users chart, I put the mailing list numbers. So for Kubernetes development, we have about 3,000, and for Kubernetes users, we have about 3.3 thousand. And just in the Kubernetes users group where we have now, it's roughly 34,000 people. So we can reach a large audience this way. But there are some other graphs. Of course, I included the rooms with the most emojis, but that's on there as well. And like I said, we'll start producing this on a quarterly basis, and we'll find a home for it in the community GitHub repo. But that's it.
All right. Any questions for Paris? All right. Moving up to our SIG updates. SIG cluster lifecycle. Tim, you're up.
So hopefully folks can see my screen real quick. I just wanted to give a quick brief shout out for some information here. So for those of you who are not aware, Lucas is on conscription, so he's going to be out for a while, and I've been taking over a lot of the functioning for SIG cluster lifecycle. Also while Robert is out too as well. So one of the things that I found, luckily from Aaron, is the auto labeling feature that now exists for owner files. That is highly, highly useful. It has allowed us to have a consistent burn down against our backlog. Our backlog currently has about 59 more items to burn down against 111, and some of them are bugs, some of them are just minor things or feature additions, but we'll deal with it as we reach closer to release date. And the auto labeling is highly helpful for actually getting accurate labeling for determining what PRs are inbound for the SIG, so we can actually review them in a timely order. So I just want to say thank you to the test info folks for helping us to get that in place. And if for other folks who don't have it in place, I highly recommend doing it. Now for the status update, we're, like I mentioned before, we're burning down against 111. The SIG is currently working on some major feature items, one of which is the master join workflow scenario. We hope to have that in place for the 111 cycle, but it would be alpha at best. There's also some ongoing work with regards to restructuring what we call Kubernetes phases, or how the flow of the tool works. Lastly, we are dealing with a bunch of bugs and issues and potential restructuring problems with regards to upgrades. So in the 110 release cycle, we had found a bunch of upgrade issues that came across. And they came across in part because we have some pretty broken tests. And that kind of dovetails back to what Josh was saying earlier. It would be nice to have a consistency for when we do a release to make sure that all the tests are passing before we cut the release, or have a bar that we agree upon. Outside of that particular sub-project of KubeADM, the second sub-project I'll give a quick update on is the cluster API. Courtesy of Chris Nova. There is a new repo that is now available for the cluster API underneath the new organizational structure. It's underneath Kubernetes SIGs / cluster API. They're aiming to keep out cloud provider logic, and they're hoping to have an alpha release in 111. And if you haven't seen so already, there is a proposal for configurable machine setup. And that has been sent to the devel list, and people are executing on that base. That's it for SIG cluster lifecycle.
All right. Any questions for Tim? All right. Moving on to autoscaling. Sally.
All right. So hopefully everybody can hear me. So for SIG autoscaling for this next release, we have kind of two major focus areas. So the first is some additional improvements to the HPA v2 beta APIs. So one of the things that users have been asking us for a while is kind of a way to control the specificity of their metrics better. So a lot of metric systems that people are using the custom metrics
functionality of the HPA with have the ability to focus queries down to additional labels. So we're looking at how we can support adding like a kind of label selector in a generic way to do that. And a couple small tweaks to the structure of the API objects to kind of unify amongst the different metric sources. And then the other major source of work that we're focusing on is we're hoping to get out a alpha for the vertical pod autoscaler soon, hopefully by the end of this month or next month. We're going to be doing a demo of that actually at KubeCon during our deep dive, I believe. So if you're interested in the vertical pod autoscaler and you happen to be at KubeCon, I'd recommend you swing by. But those are, and then finally, we are looking to kind of get the end-to-end tests for the HPA custom metrics functionalities be a little more robust to the point where we can move them over to blocking so that we don't accidentally break anything. And that's about it for KubeCon or for SIG autoscaling for this release.
Any questions for Solly? All right, and last and certainly not least, Mr. Jace Dumars with SIG PM.
You are now.
Hey, all right. Thanks for letting us present. So SIG PM is in the middle of sort of reorchestrating what we do. And essentially, we're trying to find the things that we can apply the most effort to with a fairly limited set of people who are contributing right now. The big focus that we've decided on for the moment is to try and work on getting a good feedback mechanism for user suggestions and input. So I'm playing around with this idea of a form that could just be widely distributed and shared to present feedback. I'm also looking at some ways that we can implement some interesting automated analytics, maybe using some machine learning on the back end of that, so we can create more unbiased user reports and sentiment reports around the product. So we'll see how that goes. I'm quite excited about that. We are going to be presenting at KubeCon on Thursday at 4:35 p.m. That'll be Ehor and Aparna. So that'll be a really good session to sort of learn where we're at and what we're doing. And lastly, we are working on a charter draft that codifies a lot of the things that I'm talking about right now. We're looking at the fact that SIG PM, essentially the P in PM stands for more than just product. It's really product, project, and program. And so each of those things will essentially work out into sub-projects. And the idea behind those sub-projects is that we really want to help SIGs get through some of the minutia of planning and have a successful idea of what a roadmap might look at, because oftentimes when we're really focused on the details and we get a little myopic about the long-term arc of features and implementations, and what we'd like to do is see maybe a longer horizon view of what is possible within the Kubernetes ecosystem and within Kubernetes core. So roadmaps and sharing ideas about long-term vision and having some agreement about that is actually a great way to do it. So hopefully SIG PM can help facilitate those. And again, SIG PM is not trying to dictate or to be an authoritative voice on this. We're really trying to just use all of our expertise managing product, project, and programs to help SIGs be really successful in those environments so they can focus on coding and implementation and not necessarily on all the minutia and administrivia. So SIG PM really wants to be an enabler. And that's my update. Any questions? All right.
Okay. Moving on to announcements. Just a reminder, KubeCon is next week in Copenhagen. There is no community meeting, so have a good time. You've earned it. It's also the last chance to register for the Contributor Summit, which starts the day before KubeCon. Remember, you do need to register. Even if you registered for KubeCon, you need to register separately. Otherwise, you're not going to get food or the cool, awesome, and unique Kubernetes contributor t-shirt. So do make sure to register. We're going to cut off registrations tomorrow at 7 p.m. and then Paris and I are on our plane, and by then it's too late. So please register if you're planning on attending. SIGs and leads and tech leads, remember to put yourself down for a SIG update sheet as part of the Contrib Summit. That's the quick 5-minute things you need to know that you want to communicate to other SIGs across the project, so we can kind of foster a cross-SIG communication there. Go ahead and click through. And while you're in there, you can notice that we're scheduling the SIG updates for this meeting for weeks following after KubeCon. If any of that confuses you, just ping me on Slack and I'll walk you through it. Some shout outs. So if you see someone at any time doing something really great above and beyond the Call of Duty, you can mention them and hash shout outs on Slack and we'll read them out at the community meeting. So Timothy St. Clair would like to thank Peter Zhao for steadfast PR review and contributions to SIG Cluster Lifecycle. And Chuck Ha would like to thank Lee Capillo at StealthyBox for being welcoming to new folks to SIG Cluster Lifecycle. You are welcoming and helpful, and it keeps our community healthy. Thank you. So big thumbs up to everybody out there keeping the community healthy and welcoming. Next, we have normalization of kind labels with Josh.
It's pretty simple. It's just a tracking issue. We're moving some labels around. And just important that we get that out to all the developers in case we might be breaking some piece of automation or process that we're not aware of. So if you care about that, please look at and comment on the tracking issue. You are muted.
Thank you. Cloud Foundry wants to welcome folks to their summit on May 1st, the day before KubeCon Cloud Native Con. So I guess if you're not going to the Contributor Summit, you can attend there. I don't see a link, so whoever's typing in there, if we can get a link for folks so we can plop
I'm adding
it.
Yep, do whatever.
Sweet, awesome. And the last bit before we go, someone's using Kubernetes to water their lawn. I thought it was the most interesting link I've seen in a while, so I tossed that in the notes for everyone. Check it out, it's pretty cool. Other than that, anybody have any questions or comments before we break? Remember, no meeting next week. Going once? Going twice? All right, thank you, everybody, and we'll see everyone either at KubeCon or in 2 weeks. Thanks.
Yay, Copenhagen.